So Annie, are you a quitter?
Total quitter.
So
I'm both. I'm a quitter and a gritter. Because obviously, like, the thing is that you can't succeed at something if you haven't stuck to it. So obviously I was very successful in poker, for example, so I stuck to it. But I'm also like a humongous quitter. And I think that's a little bit the point, right? Is that one or the other isn't a good thing to be. You need to be both.
Okay, so if I'm not thrilled with this conversation halfway through, I can just walk.
Go.
Good.
Walk out the door.
I'm glad I have the author's permission.
Endorse.
Excellent. So take us back to the beginning. Why did you get interested in quitting? I know that you were doing a degree at, I don't know, some Ivy League school in Pennsylvania. And you dropped out of our PhD program here at Penn. Why did you quit?
Okay, so.
Did you all know that, by the way? Okay, yeah, serious quitter, right here.
A total quitter.
This could be Dr. Duke.
That's true.
And will be Dr. Duke very soon.
That is also true. Okay, so I did 5 years here across the way in Solomon in the psychology department. So for people who are familiar with PhD programs, 5 years, it's like, what? Because that means I'd already done all the work for my dissertation. I've passed my qualifying exams. In fact, I was on the job market. I was ready to do all my job talks.
You're insane, but go on.
Well, so actually, there's a really good lesson here. There's 2 lessons here. So I got sick, and I ended up in the hospital for a couple weeks. And it was right when I was supposed to be giving all of my job talks. So I was, first of all, I had to cancel those because, you know, those are seasonal anyway. So I'm going to have to wait until the next year because I'm just at that point not healthy. And I need money. So I was on a fellowship. I didn't have it anymore. My dad's a school teacher, so he wasn't really going to be able to help me much. And so I just needed money, and that's when I started playing poker. And I loved it. I really did all the things that I was studying. So Penn at that time was really kind of one of the very first, what you would call cognitive science programs, right? Where it was very interdisciplinary. We were really thinking about how those disciplines spoke to each other in terms of how the human mind interacts with the world and processes it and models it. And that's what I was working on. And then here I'm sitting at poker, and it's just like a real life, high pace, fast-paced, high-stakes version of what I was studying, and I just loved it. And I ended up not going back and defending. So first lesson is sometimes you're forced to quit. It's not voluntary, and it forces you to explore options that you otherwise might not explore. And while it doesn't always work out, sometimes it does. And I think there's a really important lesson in that we can talk about opportunity cost and how you can neglect that if you weren't forced to. But the other thing is that the thing about quitting is it's about reversibility, and even decisions to quit are reversible, because just as of about 2 months ago, I am now enrolled as a graduate student in the psychology department at the University of Pennsylvania.
Woo! We just had to wait a few decades.
Just had to wait a few decades, and so I should so hopefully successfully defend my dissertation sometime at the beginning of 2023. That's the plan.
We're definitely excited for that. So talk to me about the early experience of poker. I think obviously I think every blurb you had on this book had to be edited because we all wrote, it's important to know when to fold them. And then your editor was like, wait, the other blurber said that too.
Yeah.
But poker is, I think, the quintessential game for understanding when to quit. And so talk to us about how you learned those lessons.
Yeah, so poker, I think poker is such a good demonstration of the importance of skilling up on exercising the option to quit. So in poker, there's sort of what you would think of traditional quitting, which is like I'm playing in a game and I get up and I cash out and I leave. That's sort of what we would generally think about in quitting. But in game theory, we talk about loss cutting. And cutting your losses is a form of quitting. In poker, that expresses as folding your hand. So I get the hand, that means I've started it, and now I choose to stop it and I fold. And when you look at what is it that separates the elite players, the professional players who really are like great and making money at it from the amateurs, it's this, how good are you at exercising that option to quit? So what you'll see is a few things. The first is in a game like Texas Hold'em. Is everybody familiar with Texas Hold'em where you get, so you get dealt 2 cards, and So a full game of Texas Hold'em has 9 or 10 players at it. You get dealt 2 cards to start. And what you'll see is that professional players will play about 15 to 20% of those 2 cards starting combinations. So this is like right off the bat, before you've seen any other cards, they're folding somewhere between 75 and 85% of the time. That is a lot of quitting, right? Whereas amateurs are playing over 50% of the 2 card combinations that they're dealt, sometimes up to 80%. It kind of depends on the game that they're playing. And so that's like a really big distinction, where amateurs are quitting much less than professionals are, even right off the bat. But then as you get deep into the hand, what happens? You're betting, you have money in the pot, right? So now we're starting to build up some debris that makes it very hard for us to let go of things. And what you'll see is that pros are pretty good at just sort of folding, because what they're thinking about is, given the new information I have, and that's 2 forms, the new cards that have come down, that tells me something about like how my hand is relating to the cards, or how I think it might be relating to my opponent's hand. And also, you might have raised me, for example, like you might have upped the ante, or doing things where you're telling me information, where your actions are allowing me to know something about what you're holding, and I'm learning that information as well. So I've got, you know, these 2 streams of information that are coming in, and sometimes they tell me things are not going well for me. At which point, that means that if I continue to bet money going forward, I am not going to be betting with a positive return on investment, and I ought to just fold my hand. That is how a professional thinks about it. They're actually very good at sort of making those calculations. What does an amateur do? Well, I know because they say it out loud. I have too much money in the pot to fold now. So, okay, so that's good for me as a pro, that you're saying that out loud nonetheless. Sometimes they'll say, well, it would have been too painful for me to see that I would have won the hand. So they'll continue that for that reason, because they don't want to feel the pain of, like, if I had continued, I would have hit something that would have happened 2% of the time or something like that. So it's that sort of regret aversion also. So they say all these things out loud, so we have a good idea of what's going on. But what that means is that they'll continue, and they actually will have a saying, which is any 2 cards can win. And I always say, but you should add on to that, not enough of the time to be profitable. You forgot about the second half of the sentence there. So, so they're just sticky. They're just much stickier than professionals. So people talk about poker skill as like, you know, do you raise, do you do whatever? And it's like literally no. Like, if the one thing that pros really do way better than amateurs is they just fold a lot.
Well, that, I mean, is amazing that it's that simple, right? To go from amateur to pro, to quit more.
Well, I mean, there's other things.
That's all I have to do.
Well, there's other things involved. Like, obviously, that mapping function that I said, right? Like, obviously, there's takes skill for me to be able to map your actions onto what your cards are. There, you have to memorize some game theory optimal tables. Like, there's some other stuff involved, obviously. But this folding thing is actually really important. So much so that when people get what we would call stuck in a game, which is the same as like if you were losing money in a stock, you know, you can be losing money in a poker game, so we call it being stuck. What you'll see from even people who have all those other skills is they'll start getting sticky. You know, for that feeling that I've got to get all this money back that I lost. So even professionals can be subject to these forces, separate and apart from the fact that they actually have great skill on a good day. Right, so in order to be truly great, you have to sort of play the same whether you're winning or losing, and that's actually quite hard to do, but the great players are better at doing that.
When we first met, I was struck by the fact that every world poker champion I've crossed paths with has advanced training in psychology or behavioral science. It's like, because you, Maria Konnikova, Liv Morey.
Wait, is that like a selection bias?
It might be.
Maybe.
I mean, maybe you're just drawn to the game, but I am curious about, I think we're all familiar with heuristics and biases and how they lead our decisions astray. And oftentimes that kind of sends us in a tailspin of escalation of commitment to a failing course of action when we should have pulled the plug, but we didn't.
Yeah.
Hard thing is to recognize that in the moment. And I think one of the things that's amazing about your poker career is you were able to take that knowledge you had in your head and put it into practice in real time when the stakes were extremely high and you're under a lot of pressure. So how?
Oh, gosh. Okay. So first of all, I just want to say, I think this is really important to acknowledge about any bias reduction strategies is I was bad at it. I was just better than other people. And I think this is really important to understand is that these biases really do have a really deeply adverse effect on decision quality. So we shouldn't have as a standard that I'm going to act as if I were objective and perfectly rational. We should have as a standard, I want to do better than I would if I weren't trying a bunch of stuff. And if I do that, those, you can grind out some pretty nice edges that way. Like if I can go from having an edge in a game that's 3% to 5%, that's big. I mean, that's huge as you're doing that hand over hand over hand. And so that's kind of what our goal is to sort of not mess up as much as we otherwise would have. So the way that I would do it was kind of like there were essentially like 3 main strategies. The first one is that you really do train yourself just to be pricing out the hand, right? So what that does is it gets you to focus on the future less than the past, because and it's not that like you're tricking your brain. It's that that's the only way that you could possibly think about the hand is through a pricing mechanism. So you're always keeping track of how much money is in the pot. You're always keeping track of what the probability is, which is a little bit of an estimate, a little bit not, of your hand winning. Sometimes it's not an estimate in the sense that I know that I have 9 cards that will make a flush. There's 1 card to come. That means I'm going to win about 18% of the time. There's not a lot of guesswork there. Sometimes it's about me comparing to your hand, then it gets a little bit more subjective, right? But I can get in the zone, and then I can figure out if I'm getting an appropriate price from the pot. So notice I'm not thinking at all about anything that I have in there because my money is not mine. It belongs to the pot. And so it's only included in that sort of pricing equation. So that's like sort of a mechanical way that sort of dealing with it. I think that's a little bit unique to poker. I think it's hard to do outside of that particular environment. But the other 2 strategies that were really helpful was one, I would set a loss limit. And so this is a pre-commitment contract in the book. I call broadly this kind of tactic to use kill criteria, which is to say, I understand that in the moment when I'm losing in a game, that I will not be particularly rational. So I don't want to be like those people who had all sorts of skills, but because they were stuck in the game, they started playing really badly, right? So I recognize that in other people, and then I know that that probably is going to happen to me as well. And if I understand that I'm going to be in a situation where I will be a poor judge for myself of why I'm winning or losing, because remember, it could be luck. And in the battle between like, do I have to say I'm playing bad or do I have to say I got unlucky? Trust me, got unlucky is going to win that battle for me and everyone else. So if I know that I'm subject to that problem, then what I'm going to do is just set up in advance that after I've lost a certain amount of money, I'm just going to get up and quit. And I kind of figure out how much money am I willing to risk based on, is it an amount of money that I could reasonably expect to win on a good day? So that's how I set the loss limit, because what I don't want to do is feel like I'm chasing something that isn't reasonable for me to get back the next day. So that's an example of a kill criteria, which is there's some set criteria. In this case, let's say, I've lost $2,000. And once I hit that mark, I have to get up and walk away. So, and then the third thing was to make really good use of quitting coaches. In other words, be accountable to other people for my behavior and make those commitments out loud. So I didn't just set a kill criteria or a loss limit in my head. I shared it with people, and they knew that this was my goal in order to follow along with this. And that made me much more likely to follow through on that, to have outside help.
So let's bridge from poker then to a lot of the quitting dilemmas in the room.
Okay.
We've got undergrads who are quadruple majoring, who are taking 7 classes, clearly need to walk away from some of those.
Yeah, don't do that.
We have MBA students who are wondering already, should I drop out of investment banking or consulting recruiting? We have executives who are wondering if they should quit their jobs. Where do you start on assessing that question?
Oh gosh. Okay. So here's the dilemma that we have, right? Grit gets you to stick to hard things that are worthwhile. That's a really good thing. Everybody should get Angela Duckworth's book. It's actually a really important quality to develop in yourself. But notice I said hard things that are worthwhile. This is the key. The problem with grit when taken too far, which is our tendency, is to stick to hard things or not hard things that aren't worthwhile. Why? Because we just have a really strong bias against quitting as adults. Okay, so kids, it's a little bit different, but once we get into adulthood, there's decades of science that shows that we don't like to walk away from things. And we'll do all sorts of rationalizations to convince ourselves that it's still worthwhile to continue. All right, so first rule of thumb is if you're thinking about quitting, it's most likely, usually, not always, but usually past the time that you should have quit.
Wait, should we not be applying this to romantic relationships?
No, we should, actually. Now, let me be clear. In a romantic relationship, there may be children involved, and so you need to think about their happiness as well. So let's assume that the romantic relationship is unencumbered, okay, by certain things. But so part of it is actually if we take a romantic relationship and things have not been going well and you're unhappy and you're unencumbered and you're thinking about quitting, what's the thing that stops people from doing it? Well, there's usually two things that stop people from doing it. One is I've put so much time into it already. But that's like a poker player saying I have so much money in the pot. That, you know, because that we think like, oh, I don't want to have wasted my time. Like I put so much time into it, I don't want to have wasted my time. But that time is gone. I mean, this is just the sunk cost fallacy. And what should matter is the next month or the next 2 months or the next year going to be the actual waste? So we don't want to sort of take what has already been spent in order to motivate us to continue to spend more when it's not a worthwhile endeavor, right? So the first thing is like, oh, I put so much time in it. And the second is, what if I switch and I'm still unhappy? Okay, so that's another big one that stops us from switching. So I actually talked to a woman that kind of shows these two things, I think, pretty well, named Dr. Sarah Olsten Martinez. And she had contacted me because she was struggling with a quitting decision. And this will help you with your quitting decision, I promise. And lucky for her, I didn't just reply and say, oh, that's interesting, and give her some tips. I was like, can I get on a Zoom? Because I happen to be in the middle of writing this book. I was like, oh, you have a quitting decision. I'm writing a book about quitting. Let's talk. So she had been, she was an ER doc. She loved emergency medicine. And she had been promoted to be a hospital administrator. So she, at that point, was only doing about 6 shifts a month in the ER, which was her original love. She's doing hospital administration. Unlike the ER work where you finish your shift and you go home, you're done. The administrative work follows you home, and it's interfering with her life with her children. So when I talked to her, I kind of said, well, what's preventing you from quitting here? And she cited both things. She said, well, but I put in so much training and so much time into, my work, all my years in medical school and, internship and residency and attending and, so on and so forth. So that was that sunk cost problem. But then she said something really interesting because she had another job offer. She said, what if I take that job and I don't like that one either? So I thought, oh, this is interesting because she's told me that she really hates the job she's in. So what I did was to try to sort of refocus it, to try to reframe it in the same way I might at the poker table where I'm trying to think about the future a little bit more. So I said, okay, so let's imagine it's a year from now and you stayed in this job. What are the chances that you're happy? And she very quickly said 0% because this is something she'd been mulling over for 3 years. She was particularly worried, she was worried about what other people were going to think and that she would be a failure. And, there's a lot of stuff going into this. So she said 0%. So I said, okay. So if you take this new job, maybe it's not going to work out. I understand that you're afraid of that. What are the chances that you'll be happy in this new job? She says, well, I haven't done it before. I said, take your best guess. And she said, well, I don't know. I've interviewed there. It seems okay. I guess it would be like 50-50. And I said, okay. Just question, is 50% greater than 0? And a light bulb went off for her, right? Because I just was showing her these forces that are causing you to stick in this thing that you're miserable in aren't the right things to be thinking about, right? You just have to think about, if my goal in life is to be on roads that make me happier, then staying on a road that is surely, like a dead certainty, going to keep me unhappy doesn't make any sense. And even though the other road is more uncertain, it's the type of uncertainty I should be seeking because I'm more likely to find happiness there. Anyway, she quit the next day, wrote back to me, said, it was all good. Her supervisors were really understanding. They actually felt like they had failed her, not like she had failed them. And last I knew, she was very happy. So that's one way you can think about quitting to help you.